That's the letter about the bullet. I held on to the bullet. All right. So part of me, as you do your very fine work, wonders about you pulling that bullet out, and obviously you're not. It doesn't appear that you're holding one to me, right? Yeah. But seeing it and letting us see it too, and being with the bullet for a beat before you go back into the dialogue. I don't know. That for me, that might have filled that out, or it would have been a horrible idea. But those are the things that you play with. You are the person who is court-martialed later in the play. And so you're given quite a gift in the writing, I think, in the descriptors of the cage and being chained and not being allowed out for showers or bathrooms or sort of thing. And I think, again, not necessarily taking more time, but helping us as you step into that cage and understand that environment and painting the cage even more with how you respond to what's around you, and as well as the words, will give us a fuller picture. Now your director may say, "Hooey," I don't agree, but those are the kinds of things that I wondered about as I watched tonight. Question to the cast. As you're reading, is it presentational or is it more introspective and reflective? What did you guys talk about and what did you decide?
I think it depended on the letter.
Okay, well that is a safe answer. What's your name? Yes.
Deanna.
Give me more. Talk to me.
So I just noticed there were some letters that were very, like it was, I don't even know how to explain it. Like some letters just were a lot more personal, and some were just kind of, you know, on the surface, like my very first one, like, I'm glad you had the brief time with us that you did, and you found someone who loved you very much, like more, I don't even know what I was trying to say.
No, you're doing fine.
Just more, not surfacey, but more like telling a story as opposed to, I miss you, and I want you, and like I want to be with you again, or, you know, I come here all the time, and we have a relationship now, you and the wall, as opposed to, I'm just writing you a letter and leaving it here, type of a thing.
I think, I'll be right with you, boss. I think in the writing as well as in the performances today, I feel like I'm ignoring you guys and spending too much time with this crowd. They're scared to go over here. I think that in the letters, there's the gift of some real raw emotion, and then there's the gift of some really nice humor, which this play needs, believe me, every once in a while. Sweet Mother of God, let me laugh at one point or another. And so the writing to do that, and I think you guys found that. That I appreciate. You were going to say something, sir, before I ramble on?
No worries. Well, we were talking about that driving home last night. So I have two very different letters. And one of them, when I was thinking about it, really was like almost like you're telling somebody a story, right? Okay, this moment in time, this is what happened, and kind of looking at people as you might in a group. And the other one was very different. It was to a very specific person. It was the person whose bracelet I was returning. And for myself, it was thinking about who is hearing this, as opposed to, you know, sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
No, you're good.
But the idea of kind of like who is receiving this story, I guess.
Which is always a conversation any actor has with himself, as in whatever performance is like, who am I talking to? Who is the audience at this point? And sometimes it's the audience, but sometimes it's other than that. So I agree. I think for the most part, you guys work those letters very well. I think there's a chance to make a greater distinction between when I'm actually talking to the person in the letter, and there were several of those, versus maybe that broader storytelling. And some of that is in the delivery, but I think you guys have nailed that. I think more of it is in the physicality of what you're doing at that moment. So if this is the subject of my letter, the next one I'm talking to, finding that person, keeping that person in one spot and working them while we kind of stare in, versus a storytelling which might be a little bit more broad and a little less specifically focused. So those are things I thought about. I very much appreciated the stylized fighting. I saw that there was a choreographer for that, although I don't remember off the top of my head. Oh, really? So you're tougher than you look, sister.
Don't believe it.
Yeah.
What do you say, Ted?
Yes, I can attest to that. I wouldn't take her up in a sword fight.
I'm not even going there. Tell me about verbalizations versus none. Most of the fighting was quiet, except for the occasional clap. However, I think this brother at one point gave us one of those guttural sort of things. And I was intrigued by it, and I was having this argument with myself. Did I want that? Did I want more of it? Did I want just the silence? But it was the only time during the evening I think I heard the audible response. So I'm just I'll look at both director and fight director about this.
It was a choice, I mean, there's narration going on there, and if there was a lot of, it would have, I think, would have detracted.
Distracting.
I mean, the playwright talks about it being a stylized fight. It's not a real fight, which is what we set up. So later on the crowd scene, we have more rah, rah, rah going on underneath with everybody, but there was a choice to not have it in the fight.
So maybe then the exclusion of that one moment, so there's a consistency in choice would be the way to go then.
That might have been an involuntary grunt when I got kicked.
That's what it was.
It was you that made the noise and not
Yeah.
him?
Yeah, I got kicked in the throat when I went there.
Yeah, how unfortunate, Mr. Sealer.
I heard that tonight.
I got all of that. I'm looking at my notes. Okay, covered all that. I'm sorry, guys. Bear with me one second.
Okay.
Here's a wonderment. And when a wonderment is my adjudicator ease for a criticism. So far I've given you lots of compliments, but I'm going to slide in the wonderment sort of thing. So we have the death of the brothers. And one can be buried and one is to rot and be eaten by dogs and all those other sorts of things. So the one brother is whisked away, and I very much liked the application of the red and the removal of the waistbands. I think you can be even more stylized in that. It can be a little bit slower. You don't have to feel like you're under the gun to do that quickly. But then the brother gets up and has to go back to, kind of generic land, if you will, where he's going to be part of the ensemble again. And I just kept arguing with myself about that transition and whether there were other ways to tackle it. So I didn't know what you had played with.
I don't remember in the original script if he said that's where that happens, or if it was just we had to get him off the floor so we can get ready to do a scene, but that's also why he left the sword there with the blood around it representing him, instead of having the body there the whole time, just for traffic, get rid of it.
I think my issue was that visually he was here and most of the cast was focused. So it appeared to us that they were able to see the body that should never be moved and buried leave. And I didn't know if there was a way for the cast to move away from that moment visually. So it was almost like he was independent of anything else on the stage.
Well,
and
no, we
just
still had
did
the two women
dressing,
undressing, right?
Yeah, but that's my point.
Yeah.
I don't know. So again, it was an inconsistent. Here's the other thing. You guys all did a beautiful job about moving in and out of characters. You played multiple roles, and I thought that worked very well. And brothers were sometimes different brothers and that type of thing. The one assignment that got a little weird for me is when this gentleman came down here and had to speak and take the blame, if you will, of being the one present when he got the
century, right?
Yeah, when he got buried, when he shouldn't have been. And for me, I'm watching the guy guarding the body and the body, and I thought, well, knowing Bob, that was a purposeful choice.
And it wasn't mine. That was the playwright's choice. It was like, oh, that works.
Well, we never change anything that the playwright does.
Well, yeah, no, good point. But it was also just like the first letter that Carmen reads when he stands up is he's talking about the loss of his brother.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, those are choices that were made, and I felt that him being part of the body was stronger, that he was the body too.
Okay, all right. You guys already know that depending on the kind of piece of theater you're doing, it demands different styles of acting. So what you do in Little Abner is quite different than what you do in a Midsummer.
Yes, it is.
That's where I remember you from, young lady. But anyway, this play is unique in that I think it may actually require two different styles of acting depending on which part of the play you're in or which character you are. I think there's a more contemporary style, and then I think there's a much more what do we want to call it, classical style of acting. And so I would encourage, and I think you guys were quite successful, I think there's still a little bit more room for growth. I would encourage you when you're in those classical moments to be careful of what I refer to as contemporary gestures. How we move our hand or hands on the hip kinds of things that may work against. So think about your classical persona versus your contemporary and make sure physicality is matching depending on which style you're in. You do wonderful, old man, by the way. And that's
Because he's an
a...
old man. No.
No! Ouch!
He's
There it
great.
is.
He's phenomenal.
Liver's over here, do you want it?
But anyway, watched you throughout the show, but especially once when you green rubbed Tiresias, am I saying the name correctly? When you took on that particular character, it was very natural and not a caricature, and I appreciate that. Nice ensemble work. This was definitely a cast that functioned as a unit. You knew when you had your moments to pop out and make the stage yours, but you very quickly folded back into the greater whole. It was not a battle of egos, which sometimes we see in theater, if you will. Young lady, it's quite apparent to me why you were cast in the role. You have an amazingly strong stage presence. And your command of the language and the cadence of the language is just exceptional. So I'm not going to mess with you ever. Because you don't need sword or army, you just need the mighty word which you command and command beautifully. I talk about the language, but also just your physical stature and how you hold yourself and how you move through, and the change in physicality based on who you're dealing with. I just thought worked incredibly well. Here's a moment that I reflected on a little bit. Your lover. There is definitively an age difference between the two of you. All right?
Oh,
that's not an issue. What's that?
Oh, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's not an issue for me. I think looking at the physicality between the two is important, so it reflects lovers and not mother and son.
Right.
And for me,
Well, they are Oedipus.
it got a little cougar-y for a minute there. And I think, young man, with no criticism, that may land a little bit harder in your court than it does in her court. So in that final moment, and again, this is redirection, which adjudicators don't do, but is there more physical intimacy to be found other than holding her hands? Is there a possibility of some kind of kiss or something that suggests that deeper intimacy than mother and son? I will move off of that. Loved the difference between you and the sister. The sister's not here, so I won't dwell on this a long time. But I would very much like the difference in characters. Sisters tend to sometimes be quite opposite each other, and I got that, and I think that built the conflict. And also, for lack of a better term, in such extreme circumstances, the loyalty between these two ladies. We got all of that. I'm going back to you, Purple Girl, because I forgot your name again. I apologize. But for me, watching you with that letter, those flowers, the wall, I was absolutely with you in that moment. It was one of, there were many fine moments, but it was one of the first ones that really just grabbed me and pulled me in with you. Thank you for that, and thank you for letting me off the hook towards the end. Okay, we covered all that, we covered all of that. Bear with me, guys. Creon and Antigone, the scene, the conflict between you, exceptional. That's one of those scenes I think that can be overacted and overplayed, but there was such control. The balance of power kinds of things, the anger, the threatening to your manhood, because as much power as he perceives himself to be, he's one of the most insecure things on the stage, quite honestly. One of the gifts that you don't get in the writing is that transition from his lordship, power, arrogance even, to that self-doubt that comes in. We have the conflicts, then there are all these other things that happen, and you come back in and you talk with Tiresias about, your words filthy, whatever the dialogue is, I don't remember. And so you're not given that transition in the writing. So finding a way to grab that transition within the nonverbal work on stage, perhaps. And I will apologize that I can't remember specifically, but as these other things are happening before you come on for that moment with Tiresias, where are you at physically on the stage?
I'm over here.
You're over there?
Yeah.
Okay, because there were 1 or 2 times I saw you shift that way. But I think in those moments, not that you would ever draw attention away from what's happening in the stage, but I think there may be some nonverbal work you can do in those moments that we may accidentally notice and not even understand what we're watching, kind of thing. So that's just a thought sort of thing. We talked about the flow. I wrote again, the flow of the characters, the chorus in and out of their roles just worked beautifully. The Musketeer speech, I don't remember who had that, the 3 Musketeers. Nice work with that. Got that. I tend to ramble and cover most of my stuff early on. Emotional builds, Creon and the Sun fight. Really nice work between the 2 of you. Conflict in this play I thought was played well, controlled and not over the top. I would say to you there is a musical theater transition moment that could use just a little bit more work, and I know this isn't musical theater, but if you'll bear with me, we finish the conflict, and there's this wonderful, as the 2 peel off in different directions, wonderful silence that was not overdone. But then I think I watched Nancy look back and give Evil Guy the eye for it. It's like, get your damn guitar ready, we got to sing.
Caught us.
So it's a weird transition to go from something that's that intense to a musical moment, even though it's not musical theater. So I think you being independent enough with Bob's directions to know just to start the music and to allow the music to start with us still visually watching them, and then the vocalist, which I think was this gentleman, could perhaps even start in cube land and continue as you move up, as opposed to everything stopping, the music starting, you coming up, and then it begins. I think we'll have a little bit more of a blend. One person's opinion.
Yeah, probably goes out there, if he picks up his cars, all of a sudden we're losing focus on them.
Yeah, no, it's a dilemma.
Yeah.
Do me a favor. Great talent, great passion, great intensity. One of the things that I appreciate about your work, I talked early on about commitment. There is no doubt that you are very much committed to what you do. And I'm confident you knew every one of those that bit of dialogue your second rehearsal. You're the actor I don't like to work with. And while I'm still struggling 3 weeks in, you knew your stuff early out. I would say as you continue to work and grow, whether it's a piece like this or other pieces, especially with that emotional gut to it, there's a way to find different ways to play angst and anger and frustration and grief and all those things. And finding in the same sequence ways to vary that but still pull it through, I think will pull us even deeper into the world that you're trying to paint us.
Sure.
Tiresias, wonderful work. Be careful of banging your rod on the wall while we're watching over here. All of a sudden, I was going to blame Nancy. I thought, hey, damn, Nancy's going to pound on that drum again. And I looked over and it was you hitting the wall, the young man. The folding of the flag, I loved it for a couple of reasons. Be careful with the precision, the gentlemen who are doing the folding. Be very slow and deliberate and careful. But I liked that. I liked where it was placed. I liked the symbolism. I think this can be just a little bit crisper. I thought it was, I had this conversation with myself about it being not an actual American flag and a white flag. And I thought we're going for symbolism, but is the symbolism even deeper than I'm looking at? You don't have to answer. Is this folding the white flag also a surrender of sorts? I don't know. Leave it alone. I enjoyed it. I thought it was beautiful, whatever your intent was behind it. What was Winter Buffalo? Who's my Winter Buffalo?
Winter Buffalo, yes.
What was the card on the outside?
It was just an enclosure.
Okay. It was very colorful. And it was the first time tonight with any reading of letter that we had color. And so I was drawn to it a little bit more than I wanted to be and wanted to be with you in the letter. It was a weird thing for me to focus on, I apologize. Coming back to you, young man, that transition though, when you went into self-doubt and regret, I thought was remarkably well done. So I want more of a bridge between the two if there's a way to do that. But what you played, I thought, worked very well. I think in Greek tragedy, which indeed this is, whether we're talking about the Greeks, whether we're talking about Shakespeare later on, when they all go, or when somebody dies, they all go. And it's just one after another after another. And I think that is a great challenge to a performer. How do you play one tragedy after another, after another, after another kind of thing? Especially, well, nope, she's dead, hung herself, nope, light on the sword, nope, gone to, you know, and that's kind of how quick that it's not, you know, it's not that flip, but that's how quick it's unveiled to us, if you will. So we are really watching you, because your emotional reaction is going to dictate our emotional reaction. And I think that's one of the huge challenges in any piece of theater that has that kind of gift, but in this one. So as you play with it, I think people sometimes tend to build reactions. You did not. You didn't fall into that trap. So then it becomes overblown. But I wonder if he becomes more distant and more detached and more flattened with each death kind of thing. I don't know. But again, I think that's something you can continue to experiment and play with, if you will. I have talked way too much. I don't know what time I started. It's almost 9 o'clock. So
About 8:30.
I started about 8:30. Really? I only talking 25 minutes?
Yeah.
Oh, I got another half hour then. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. With that said, I have a couple other comments I want to wrap up with. Vocalists.
So you haven't commented on them yet?
Yes. Now let me absolutely do that. The first song, I took notes on the first song, and I must have skipped that page entirely. I was going through. So what was striking for me in a piece of theater with music is whether it would come together, whether it would mesh or not, or whether it just kind of stands out like a sore thumb. Musically, I thought the choices did work well. The author's choices, not yours.
Yeah, those two, yeah.
Yeah. So with that said, one of the things that struck me about especially the initial sequence, The Great Success, is first of all, your voice is wonderful. And quite different than what I heard in Little Abner. No, you're Little Abner, I'm getting my ladies mixed up now.
Yeah.
But you have got, it's not a folk sort of sound to you, but it's got that flavor. I'm certain you can do many other things. But that was very nice and very deliberate. Now that I know the two of you are connected, I understand how he learned balance, because I assumed if he tried to overpower you guitar-wise, you would have a come-to-Jesus conversation at home that night. But no, on a serious note, the balance between the two of you was wonderful. Because sometimes there is a battle between the instrumentation and the vocalist, and that never works out well for the vocalist, but that worked beautifully. Only then to be complemented by the harmony. And at first, you sounded a little bit choral to me, which is a compliment. Anybody was looking me in the back, I'm looking around thinking how many are singing, and I could only find you. So you filled out that harmony in a really complete way. Then of course you guys are featured in other moments of the show, which I thought worked beautifully. Nice voices, fit into the play, realize that this wasn't an Ethel Merman moment, if you will, where you needed to belt and present the song, but make sure it was woven into the fabric of the piece. So, I apologize, I told you I was done, I was going to take questions, and then I talked for another 4 minutes. So, questions, folks, things you wished I had talked about that I did not. I beat you into submission. Unintentionally, but I've done it.
What about the ending? How'd you like the ending? Of us all standing there saying
The
different
sequencing
things?
and,
I'd just like to hear feedback on that, wondering how that, did it flow? I'm just interested.
Yes, it flowed. One of my bits of baggage as a director, as an adjudicator, somebody who does theater, we all have our senses when we come to theater, and some of us are more listeners, some of us are more visual, and I tend to be a more visual person, for good or bad, whatever that means. So the peeling off and the going back, I thought worked very well. Part of me wondered about physical stances that weren't always directly back to the wall, but were a little bit more profile for the visual variety. But then also when it was time to come back with that shorter one-liner, we didn't have to do a full turn and turn back kind of thing. Or you did it with some and not others. Here's where I get hung up with the visual, and I apologize for it. Everybody was very tan, very pseudo-white in the back, but there were two performers towards the end who became part of the tableau that were still in color. And I wondered on the way back to your moment if there was a way to dump the yellow or dump the green, so we were a little bit more uniform in that particular moment. I think for us to, let me say this the right way, with a skilled cast, which you guys are, and a moment where you're going back to be very much part of this shrine, the other thing that crossed my mind is, do I need to see you at all anymore, but can I just listen to the emotion and the words coming out of your mouth? Not necessarily meaning that the stage needed to be black. I'm just not suggesting that, and in here that wouldn't have worked anyway. But I don't know if you always needed to turn back to me if I could just focus on not the Vietnam Wall, but if you think about the AIDS quilt, and if you've ever been to a display of the AIDS quilt, one of the signatures for that particular event is that there's the reading of the names. And you're always listening to those names kind of while you're present. And that's not something I'm suggesting that you do here, but that takes me back to where I was thinking about the very end of the play. So, again, I am violating what an adjudicator should do as far as kind of redirecting, and I absolutely shouldn't be doing that. To answer your question, what did work very well and was a very nice cap to this play. I always am thinking, what would make this better? You know, sometimes nothing. Sometimes it's already damn good. You know, and you guys can take your hats off in that arena. What else, guys? Okay, so a couple things. I'm going to remind you, how did I start this adjudication?
I think you apologize
Only to you, sir.
You said not to change anything.
Yeah, change
Make fun of
nothing.
us, do you?
Change nothing, change nothing. Tomorrow's performance is exactly the same as last night's and tonight's. Although we all know that there is, that the glory of live theater is there's, but no changes based on our conversation tonight. The other thing I would love for you guys to do, and it doesn't happen very much, but I would still like it to happen, is that every person in this room, including folks in the audience, go to the TANYS website and click on the button that says Adjudicator Evaluation. And please do for me what I've spent the last half hour, 40 minutes doing for you. Of course, I'd like to hear if there are things you appreciated, but more importantly, I would rather hear what would make this a more complete learning experience. I pay attention to what button, you know, it's a rating scale. I pay attention to that, but I don't really. It's the comments you type in the last two that I actually pay most attention to. So I would love if you guys would do that for me. Have a wonderful run. Congratulations for going tomorrow.
Thank you.
Good, ladies and gentlemen.
Guys, we can't go to Parker's because they canceled, told us they couldn't have us. So we're gonna go to Applebee's.
They can't have us?
That's what they called me back and said they can't accommodate us.
Oh, okay, they just don't want money.
Yeah,
Got
that's
it.
what I said. I told them we'll take it somewhere else.
Good night, you guys.
Thank you so much.
Good night, Paul, thank you.
Good night.
I was about to be excited.
Right,
To have
sir.
that much business.
Yeah, right?
See, look at look. And over there, I don't usually, you're turning down 20.
Right, so we're gonna all order and buy drinks.
Oh, maybe they just.
Thank you for not cutting me off.
Yeah.
Super appreciate it.
He's like, he comes in after.
What's that?
Go down the way.
Yeah.
Go down the.
Yes.
Much better tonight. Thank
It's all
you.
good.
I just, yeah.
All right. See you all tomorrow.
You're not going to Applebee's.
I have friends in town to see the show tomorrow.
Yeah, Fred.
That was my
So we'll go to Applebee's.
But-
So I thought we were going to
I know.
So I had asked my friend Joe, who was here for the show, he wants to start doing some player stuff in the future. So I was going to have him come. Is it weird if he comes to Applebee's? You don't think it's weird? Okay.
I don't even know what.
Yeah, I'll stop. I already told me.
Thanks.
And there's a universality of it. Number one, it's gonna be on.
I would assume I love it.
Oh, yeah.
So, we want to talk about the Theater Association of New York State. Here, Paul is here representing as one of the best adjudicators we have.
I'll give you back the coupon.
There you go. And he's here to give us some feedback about what he saw tonight.
Well, thank you very much. I'm actually going to parrot your president for a second, because the invitation to see live theater after such a drought is a gift to me, not only to your audiences, and I guess the chance for you guys to get back out there and do what you do so well. We had the privilege of doing lots of Zoom virtual adjudications, but I got to tell you, live theater is live theater for a reason, and I don't care how good you are, Zoom doesn't quite get us there, does it? So with that said, my job is to talk about the piece, if you will, and I had the privilege of reading it before I came for the first time, and as much as I appreciated it on the page, and I thought, okay, this is a complex little piece, what you brought to the stage, I thought, was even more complex. And I'm right here now, my head is spinning in 15 different directions. So you're going to spin with me, all right? That's how we're going to get through this process.
We blame it on Julia.
What's that?
Yeah. That sounds about right.
It's best that you find your place, Pittsburgh boy. Yes, in the back would be perfect. Anyway, so my job, and you guys, you've worked with Bob for years, you're very familiar with the Theater Association, but let me just give it from my perspective. My job is not to redirect this production, although sometimes I stumble dangerously into that arena, so you're allowed to yell at me, but my job is to react to what came off the stage tonight. You have yet one more performance, correct?
Yes.
So what we talk about today, what comes out of my mouth tonight, will in no way affect tomorrow's work. That was a directive of sorts, even though I'm not the director. If you change anything based on the conversation tonight, I'll have done you a horrible disservice. So this is about the next time you work, whether it's in this particular piece, and I understand you want to be considered for festival, or whether it's in your work in future pieces with this organization or other, if you will. A curiosity question. I did not get to see the work outside in the fall. Is this the same collective cast? Have there been changes?
Except for one.
Except for one?
Carmen.
What was the difference for you? Just out of curiosity, outdoors versus in?
I feel that the strength, the gravity of this production is much stronger inside of an enclosed space. And I just had a conversation with somebody right before she left.
This is way
And
stronger.
I think you feel more trapped in this space. I think unique to this performance, I think being inside of a church adds more gravitas to it as well. So at least for me, I found it easier to go to that place here. I found the letters were more heavy here.
We were mic'd then, and it was colder than the Klondike. It was bitterly cold, and all of us had long johns on, and that might change.
That was a perfect temperature, actually. For Jen.
I think that the set was more impactful outside. Number one, the wall was longer, a little bit larger than
So
it
not
is here.
connected?
It was still.
No, it was the same.
It was
Oh,
the
it's
same
the
thing.
same, it's just,
It just
it
had the
looked
brick,
like,
the
it just
empty
had
space
the
was
way that it
levels.
looked, it was just, because the Vietnam Wall is outside, and I think this set to me was a little more, magnificent, so to speak, outside than in, but I did prefer acting inside here, but the outside was unique and it was fun to do, because I've never done that before.
Benefer's husband is an architect and a set designer of some great repute, and the comment that he made recently was that you notice the wall much better here. It's much more impactful here.
It's much more present, yeah. Well, I can't see, I didn't see it outside.
And plus, we were in the
But it was
middle of
very
academics, so
impressive.
everybody's wearing masks. If they weren't actually reading a letter, doing something, they were masked. And blocking was so totally different because we had to keep the 6 feet and how.
And
Right.
order of pieces too.
Say it one more time?
Yeah, I moved stuff around.
Order of the sequences,
Oh, okay.
the little pieces.
Yeah, Bob told me as I was walking in, this was revision number 9, I think is what he told me.
I don't think any of us have the same script as we do.
Yeah.
Yes, you do.
The one you sent out the night before the first proposal?
It made it more personal when it came to reading and sharing the story of the letters. And then when it came for the Antigone story to be frozen in time, it made more sense in an intimate place rather than a very large place.
Outdoor performance is wonderful. It's a wonderful experience.
Right.
Before audience and for actors. I think it's a greater challenge for actors outdoors because you're competing with other things to keep your audience's
Natural
attention. And if it's a piece of music or theater, I think it can be served well outdoors. I think a piece like this is probably, again, I didn't see the outdoors version, much better served in an intimate space. And while this is not a black box, that's what we'll call it for the sake of this evening, if you will. I think the chance for us to be as close to you as we were physically does not allow us, not that you would let us, pull away from the piece of the theater. We must stay with you. Of course, your work made us stay with you. The wall, the shrine, I kept referring to it as, is very, at first I thought, is this going to dominate things visually for me? But it absolutely did not. I was looking at props and those sorts of things as the show progressed. And I want to talk about letters and memorabilia and those sorts of things. I wish, and this probably sounds like the craziest thing you've ever heard, I wish there was a way that we could have, before the show, been comfortable enough and invited onto the set so we could have looked at the items. I think as I did that after the show, I very much appreciated what I looked and kind of wove my own stories into the props, minus your picture, and then I found out. I found out who is the artist back there.
What's that? Oh, that's Mick Jagger.
Yeah, I was told the picture was Mick Jagger, and I got
That's his baby picture.
I told her she was lying to me, but she said she wasn't. So anyway, I don't, that's just something that's just flying off my head. If we had had a chance to come and peruse, would that have pulled me into the intimacy of the play even more? I don't know. It's just one of those things that popped across my head. Let me deal with some practical things first. Ran 67 minutes, about 67 minutes tonight. Are we entering, if invited, as a long or a short?
Yes, long.
A long, perfect, okay. And I have to ask, you're the king of the festivals, but I'll still ask as a formal adjudication, what I saw tonight, will that be what I would see on stage at festival?
I sure hope so.
So darn close to it. And you all know, and especially in a piece like this, we have some flexibility with casting, but with a piece like this, it would be my hope that if you're invited that we would essentially see the very same cast. I think that's kind of an important part of that.
My hope too.
Yeah. So with that said, I'm just talking about direction for a second, and we talked very briefly in the lobby about a transition from outdoors to indoors, and you guys needing to spend some time actually with restaging at least bits of the show, if not good chunks of it.
Yeah.
For me, I thought the flow and pacing and kind of the emotional builds throughout the show worked wonderfully. So bravo for your directorial hand, and bravo for you guys being able to follow that and find those builds. And we'll talk about some specific sequences. Having an argument with myself, love the pre-show music. And it seemed to be war music of different eras, different wars.
Right.
But most of what the reference of the play is Vietnam era.
It's, yeah, but I felt it was important. I mean, there's only two that are not Vietnam, which is talking about George
W. Yeah,
George W. one, and then the one that was from World War I, as a matter of fact. That I didn't want my son to grow up to be a soldier. Same reason why I added in with the playwright's permission for the third song. He had something else in the original script, but it was one of those songs you can't get rights to. So that was a traditional American folk song from the Civil War, and he's like, good idea.
So the play is about war in general. And we have these two different societies, if you will, looking in some ways through a very similar lens, but from their different worldly perspectives. And so I I appreciate, as I wrote my notes in the end, I love this. I love that we've kind of generalized the war. What an interesting thing to say, but I appreciated that. But then as I watched the world of the play and the references about the Vietnam and touching the wall and seeing the name in 1965 and the 20th reunion and all these snippets, it kept driving me back to Vietnam. And then I started to question myself about, well, I liked the music. Would it have caused a confusion for an audience? Don't know the answer to that. Here's another weird thing. You guys know this well, and Bob knows it very well. I think, my opinion, that sometimes predictability in theater is death. So patterns and those types of things in performance, in acting, in staging can be really quite wonderful. But if we can start to predict what might happen, then I think sometimes we can sit back and disengage a little bit. And so one of the things, I want to think about the letters a lot. I want to talk about that for a bit. One of the things that might have become a little bit predictable for me when it came to staging was the getting up, opening the letter, and moving down to do it. And while there was some variations from time to time, we had a lot of that pattern, and that might be something that's worth looking at. Costuming. Is my costume?
No.
No? Okay. So I appreciated the muslin costumes. I thought they worked very well, and for me, made the cast as much a part of the visual element and the scenic element. I thought that worked well. I would strongly encourage, where did my friend go? I'd strongly encourage not having clothing street clothing that can be seen underneath. So that gray just popped at me, and you were the only one where I noticed that kind of thing. With that type of costuming, undergarments are a danger, and you guys dodged that bullet very nicely. So in general, I thought the costumes worked well, and I kind of just liked the neutralness of all of that. Is Virginia? Yeah, she's. You missed my initial comments, but I refer to this as the shrine, and I really could have sat here for 2 hours without the play, just looking and absorbing. Very, very nice work. As I sat here and I thought, outside, what happened with the see-through? Did the sun ever shine through the back? Was it glorious?
There was some problem, not.
Oh, I wasn't even thinking of it as a problem. I was thinking of it as a benefit that you didn't have here.
Because you're up against that building, you never did get a sunset behind it, or I see what you're saying, yes.
Terry, again, I touched on props and wishing we could get up there to kind of view all that went up there. But the props that were used throughout the piece. And I thought, and whether you were responsible or Bob, I'm not clear, but the use of these pieces for sword placement, I thought that's kind of ingenious.
We were using the ground when we were outside. We were stabbing them right into the ground, so we had to
That would be a good idea here.
rethink how.
I'm confident that the church would have had some feedback to the holes in their rug. I'll come back to those kinds of things. I want to think about commitment to any piece of theater. And you guys know that whatever you're doing on the stage, you need to be totally committed to the moment, to the work. And I thought there was great success in that. If I were to suggest one area to maybe take a little bit more of a look at is the actual opening, as we come in with the different chants. It was very regimented, so I'm thinking, okay, are we going for kind of a military march of sorts? Is that just how we've decided to come in? But for me, the chants were there, but I think could have had less uniformity and more life to them. And I would suggest to you that your facial expression match your chant, unless the director has told you he wants dead neutral.
I want the cacophony. I want the cacophony.
Okay. So for me, sometimes what you were chanting versus the facial expression was not necessarily a consistent thing. That is such a weird, tiny thing to pick on, but gosh, I'm going for it, okay? So I apologize for that. As you come up and read the letters, there's some, and here's where we're really going to focus on letters for a beat or two. I saw different types of paper, and that made sense to me. I referred to you as Purple Girl because I did Purple and Flower Girl is what I called you. And then we had some what appeared to be maybe typed letters, then we had some traditional, and part of me thought I liked that. I liked that what they were would have been individualized to them and who they were in the era. I think there's a chance to play with that even more. I'm not always sure that the plain white piece of paper said much about who you were or the person you were writing to. Not that I always needed to see purple, I'm not saying that, but could there have been lines? Could it have been a little bit more tattered or worn? How many times have you pulled this letter out, or did you just write it right before you came to the wall this time? I don't know the answer to those things, but those are things that I know as you guys explore, you'll make it even kind of more rich and more full. Here's redirection, Bob. I told you I'm not allowed to do it, but everybody comes up and they read, and a couple of folks saw the name on the wall and touched. Purple Flower Girl, what's your real name?
Julia.
Julia. I loved all of that. Weird moment for Paul. I thought, is the wall always here? Is this a wall that's always here? And as you come up, it's static. Static. And if that's so, is there an opportunity to leave those letters at this wall as opposed to? And I don't know.
Which we were able to do there because actually there actually was a stone wall
Was there?
that they stood in front of.
Yeah.
Here it was just like, I need to get them out of the way.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about the lip of a stage or something like that. And again, these are the dumb things that come through my mind as I watch the work you guys do. I think there's a chance to, some of the moments that you talk about, some of the letters are very much specific to the individual, but some of them paint some really interesting pictures and moments. And spending a beat with it, a beat longer for your audience, sometimes allows us to grab onto and join you in that world. I have two examples. One simple one, and I can't tell you who wrote it,